Maybe it would be worth giving a little more attention to this question. Why wasn't the resurrection of Jesus recorded immediately as one of the greatest events in the history of man? There are several factors. One I mentioned was that those who were following the way, the followers of Jesus, believed that he would be back in their lifetime. This was a misunderstanding of things that Jesus said, but nonetheless, that was their belief. So why would they record the history? Why would they consider it an event in history when it was going to be all contemporary? Another thing is just look at the environment they were in. The new Christians were opposed both by Rome and by the traditional Jews. You know the backstory of Paul. He was a Jew, a Pharisee, and he had authority to go to Damascus and take prisoner people who had accepted the way, who believed in Jesus. Paul became converted and then became an enemy of his own Pharisees. And when Paul was stoned, he was stoned by the Pharisees. He was stoned by the Jews. So this was really serious opposition. They thought they had executed him. And then eventually Paul himself was executed by the Romans. So the young Christian church had opposition everywhere, and they had to be careful. The Jews had a long tradition of copying manuscripts of the Old Testament. There were scribes who just did that. That was their job. And they had quality control procedures to follow to do it. There was no such tradition in the early church. This person says, oh, why didn't historians? There were no historians. They were just average people. And when they finally did start copying things down, they did a terrible job of it. They were total amateurs. It was full of mistakes. When you think of who the early Christians were, what they thought, and the environment they were in, it's a miracle we have any record of that. The Gospel of Luke comes to us because someone asked for it. Theophilus? Luke wrote it because Theophilus wanted to know, whoever Theophilus was. And then Luke wrote his second account, which was the development of the early church and the record of Paul's travels. Luke doesn't record Paul's execution in Rome, so I'm assuming that Luke's account of Acts was written before Paul's execution. So all these things, the opposition from both Rome and the Jews, and people had to be careful. There wasn't a local Christian scribe or a local Christian historian who was recording everything that was happening in the Christian community. That just didn't exist. Tacitus, who is a Roman historian who wrote about the Christians, wrote about them because Nero was accusing the Christians of burning Rome, and Tacitus didn't like Nero, so he was putting up some opposition to that, therefore wrote a little bit about the Christians. But Tacitus didn't have any respect for the Christians either. It just happened to fit into something he was writing. Both the Romans and the Jews tried to cover up the resurrection. They did not want that idea getting out into the public or growing like it did. When you look at the environment and all the circumstances around the development of Christianity after the resurrection, it's really surprising that we have so many documents, so many records that we do have. Maybe not as early as you would like, but there was a lot that went into that not being something that happened right away. Nonetheless, we have a lot of reason to believe that the record we do have is a true and accurate record. But that's another study. This is just why not sooner?